Hey guys, so today we are going to answer a subscriber question, and the question in question was, Frederick, what does it mean to be a small language? So let's get into it. So you may have heard me or seen me talk about small languages, and that one of my favorite things about, say, Go is that it's a very small language, and the same thing goes for JavaScript, that it's also a fairly small language. But what is the definition of this? Well, there's not really a definition for it. It's more about comparing it to something else. Now, if we take a very large language, such as, say, Scala or Java or C#, the thing that I touch and think about when I think about something being large versus small is that a small language is a language that only really gives you, or tries at least to give you, well, I'm not saying that it tries necessarily, because that's a different type of problem, because over time, like, usually things start out fairly small and then they grow to be larger over time. I mean, no language starts with all the features they have as of today. So, but you can think about it in terms of, all right, so for JavaScript, there's only a few constructs that are actually provided to you, which are very similar to mostly what we call the basics. Like, you have your for loops, your variables, your iterators, like these sorts of concepts, right? And then you have languages that are large, which will have features such as, say, in Scala, you have pattern matching, you have tons of these higher level abstractions, you have generics, you have etc, etc, etc. Now, I'm not saying that, one is better than the other. It's just that as a language grows and the more features it has, just at the syntactic level, because that's one part of it. The other part is the amount of libraries. Now, Java is, as an example, notoriously large, like when it comes to packages and just libraries, because there's so many of them. And that is a good thing and a bad thing, depending on your viewpoint. You see, the good thing about it, and that is one of the reasons why a lot of companies invest in Java, is that means that you have a set of packages that are, in this case, specifically in Java, it is maintained by an a trusted organization as well, which gives a bit of security. But having all of these packages gives you a lot of power, because you can pretty much do whatever you want, and you can trust that there's going to be a library or something that gives you the convenience that you're looking for when you need it. The downside is that there's a lot of stuff to learn. That makes sense, right? The more there is to learn, the longer it's going to take you to be productive in it, and the longer it's going to take you to be able to do certain things. And there is another very subtle problem to it, and this is, of course, very subjective, but something that I will argue that is also an issue is that the larger the language is, the more likely it is that you will see inconsistencies, and you will have people who have very different styles of doing things. And it's especially easy. As an example, Scala is extremely large. Like, considering how much you can do with, you can basically redefine your own operators, and pretty much anything can be redefined as anything you want, which brings a very popular thing such as DSLs into the mix. And when you add DSLs into your language, you grow this problem even bigger, because you can now basically make the language do whatever you want. And that is very powerful and expressive, but it's also a source of great confusion for people who are not masters of the language. And that's kind of the thing. You see, a master of something will always find something simple. And then it doesn't matter how big the language is, because they are masters. But people who are not masters of a language can find it very tricky to just keep up with all, especially when people are using a lot of advanced features that, I'm not saying over-engineering, but maybe I am saying it, because the thing is that I want us to just touch on the fact that it's very rare, at least from my experience, that the more features a language has, just because you have more features that it can do something that you can't do in the smaller languages. It's actually funny because a lot of these higher level constructs that you gain from the larger languages are actually more convenience oriented, or syntactic sugar, or something of that nature that caters to a very specific use case. It's very rare that you can't make do or be productive, pretty much as productive, with just the base features that most programming languages have. So I think that although there is a sweet spot to things, I mean, an old saying is that perfect is when there is nothing more to remove. And I really believe that. I really believe that what you should go for is maximum empowerment, but you should never ever have more than you actually need. And that is of course subjective, but because programming languages are full of community people who will tell you that this is critical or that is critical or so forth and so forth. And it's very hard to keep a language small over time. So what I want you to take away from this is that when we talk about a large language versus a small language, it usually comes down to how much there is to learn about that language. How many libraries does that specific language have just in of itself? How much how many higher level constructs, like more advanced language features do you have that are specific? Maybe even they don't have to be specific to that language, but it's a construct that isn't very common in a lot of other languages. That's the sort of thing that bloats up a language and makes it very powerful and very big. And when we talk about a small language, such as Go or JavaScript, it usually comes down to having a smaller set of features and a smaller set of syntax. And the trade-off there is that the smaller the language is, that quote unquote faster you're going to adopt it. So there's and none is really better than the other. It comes down to where in, your proficiency level you are within that language. And it's a philosophical discussion to figure out where is that sweet spot, and it differs from language to language. Have a great day.